The courtroom fell silent as 6-year-old Amara Daniels, clutching her worn stuffed bunny, pointed to the judge and said, "You're my dad." The courtroom wasn't ready for the truth. The courtroom was unusually still, the kind of stillness that made every sound, every shuffle of paper, every nervous cough echo as if amplified. The case of 6-year-old Amara Daniels had captured the attention of this small community in Lexington, Kentucky, not just because of her tender age, but because of the questions swirling around her custody. On one side sat her mother, Vanessa Daniels, a woman whose past mistakes loomed large in the eyes of the law. On the other sat the state attorney, arguing that Amara would be better off in foster care. But Amara wasn't like other children. She had a way of speaking, not with the hesitant voice of a child, but with a kind of wisdom that made adults stop and listen. Today, as she sat on the edge of her chair, her small legs swinging beneath her, she looked around the room with wide, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Dressed in a simple yellow dress, her tiny braids framed her face, and she clutched a well-worn, stuffed bunny to her chest. Judge William Harper, a man in his late 50s, with neatly combed silver hair and a reputation for fairness, presided over the case. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp blue eyes fixed on Amara. He was known for his composure, for his ability to keep emotion out of the courtroom. But today something about the girl's presence seemed to chip away at his usual demeanor. The proceedings began as expected. The state attorney presented their case, highlighting Vanessa's history of instability, while Vanessa's lawyer fought back, painting her as a mother determined to turn her life around. But then it was Amara's turn to speak, and the room seemed to brace itself as the bailiff guided her to the witness stand. The soft scuff of her shoes against the polished floor was the only sound in the room. Vanessa leaned forward in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together, her lips moving as if in silent prayer. Judge Harper adjusted his glasses, preparing to hear the child's perspective, but even he couldn't anticipate what would come next. "Amara, do you know why you're here today?" the judge asked, his voice gentle but firm. Amara nodded, her big, brown eyes meeting his, with a directness that was disarming. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm here because people don't know where I belong." The judge gave a small nod, impressed by her composure. "And where do you think you belong, Amara?" She paused for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, with a voice that carried both innocence and certainty, she said, "With my dad." The courtroom collectively held its breath. Judge Harper tilted his head slightly. "And who do you believe your dad is?" he asked, his tone even but curious. Amara turned her gaze, unwavering, and pointed directly at him. "You are." The silence that followed was so heavy, it seemed to press against everyone in the room. Even the hum of the air conditioning faded into oblivion. Judge Harper sat back, his usually impassive face betraying a flicker of shock. The entire courtroom froze, waiting for what would happen next. The room erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. The once silent courtroom, now buzzing with disbelief and confusion. The court reporter's hands hovered over the keys, momentarily stunned by what she had just heard. Vanessa Daniels, seated at the plaintiff's table, let out an audible gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as if to stifle the shock. Meanwhile, the state attorney leaned back in their chair, their expression a mixture of confusion and skepticism. Judge Harper, however, remained frozen, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair, as if anchoring himself in the moment. His face was unreadable, but the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. It was as though Amara's words had ripped open a part of his life he had long thought sealed shut. "Amara," he began, his voice uncharacteristically strained, "why do you think I'm your dad?" Her answer was immediate, simple and devastatingly direct. "My mommy told me," she said, clutching her stuffed bunny tighter. "She said when I was born, you didn't want to be around, so you went away." Vanessa, now trembling, stood abruptly, "That's not true," she exclaimed, her voice cracking under the weight of the moment. "She doesn't know what she's saying." The courtroom deputy stepped forward to calm her, and she reluctantly sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Judge Harper took a deep breath, struggling to regain control of the room and, more importantly, himself. "Order," he said firmly, his voice regaining some of its authority. The courtroom quieted, though the tension was palpable. All eyes were now on him, waiting to see how he would respond to the little girl's claim. "Amara," he said gently, turning his attention back to her, "did your mother tell you anything else about me?" Amara nodded slowly. "She said you're a judge and that you help people, but she also said you never came back because you didn't love her." The words hit like a hammer, and for a moment it seemed as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, muffling her sobs, while Judge Harper's gaze remained fixed on the little girl. His expression was unreadable, but his hands, now clasped together on the bench, trembled ever so slightly. The attorneys on both sides began whispering furiously to their clients, each trying to figure out how to navigate the bombshell that had just been dropped. But all of it felt like background noise compared to the weight of Amara's words, which lingered in the air like a storm cloud. Finally Harper leaned forward, his voice steady but tinged with something uncharacteristically personal. "Amara, what you've said is very serious. I need to know, did your mother tell you this recently, or have you always known?" The little girl tilted her head, as though trying to remember. "She told me a long time ago," she replied, "but I didn't understand until I saw you. When I came in here today, I just knew you're my dad." Her words struck a chord deep within him, one he couldn't ignore no matter how much he wanted to. But instead of letting his emotions show, he cleared his throat and turned to the attorneys, signaling that this revelation would require further examination. The calm before the inevitable storm settled over the room, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to miss. The courtroom was adjourned shortly after Amara's revelation, giving everyone time to process what had just occurred. Judge Harper excused himself, quickly retreating to his chambers, where the weight of her words pressed down on him like an anvil. He shut the door behind him and sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Could it be possible? Could this bright-eyed little girl really be his daughter? His mind raced back to a time he rarely revisited, his early 30s, when his career was just beginning. He had been ambitious then, determined to climb the ladder in the legal world, and relationships often took a backseat. There had been a brief, intense romance with a woman named Vanessa Daniels. She was beautiful, full of life, but their paths had diverged. As quickly as they'd crossed, she had disappeared from his life, almost as soon as she entered it, and he had never looked back, until now. The next day Judge Harper called a closed session, a rare move that signaled the gravity of the situation. The courtroom was almost empty, save for the attorneys Vanessa and Amara. The mood was somber, the air heavy with unspoken questions. "Miss Daniels," Harper began, his voice firm but controlled, "I need to ask you directly, is there any truth to what Amara said yesterday?" Vanessa's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she shook her head. This was her moment, and she knew it. Slowly she stood, her eyes meeting Harper's. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's true." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Harper's expression remained stoic, but the color drained from his face. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, his voice betraying a trace of hurt beneath the formality. Vanessa swallowed hard. "Because you made it clear what you wanted back then. You had your career, your ambitions, and I didn't want to complicate your life. I thought I was doing the right thing." "And Amara," Harper pressed his tone sharper, "now you thought keeping her father out of her life was the right thing." Vanessa's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. "I didn't think you'd want her." she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "And when things got hard for me, I didn't know how to fix it. I'm sorry." Harper leaned back, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, regret, and a strange newfound sense of responsibility, all swirled within him. But there was no time to dwell. The focus now had to be on Amara, and what was best for her. The attorneys proposed a DNA test, a logical next step to confirm the truth. Harper agreed, though the idea of waiting for the results gnawed at him. In the meantime, he ordered a temporary stay on Amara's placement in foster care, allowing her to remain with her mother until the matter could be resolved. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, legal wrangling, and quiet introspection. Harper couldn't help but wonder what kind of father he could have been if he had known. Could he still be that father now, or was it too late? When the results finally came in, they confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. Judge William Harper was indeed Amara's biological father. The confirmation brought a mix of relief and new questions. The courtroom was now a crucible where every decision and every word carried the weight of a child's future. But the real test was yet to come. As the emotional stakes climbed higher with each passing moment, the courtroom was packed once more, tension rippling through the crowd as the case resumed. The DNA results had ignited a storm of emotions and questions, but the hearing wasn't just about biology. It was about what kind of future Amara deserved, and who could give it to her. Every eye in the room shifted between Judge Harper, seated with his usual authority, and Vanessa, whose fragile composure threatened to crack under the weight of the moment. Vanessa was called to testify, her lawyer guiding her gently through the narrative of her life. She recounted the challenges she had faced after Amara's birth, financial instability, the struggle to raise a child on her own, and the choices she made that landed her in trouble with the law. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she didn't shy away from her mistakes. "I thought I was protecting her," Vanessa said, her gaze shifting to Amara, who sat quietly beside a court-appointed guardian. "I thought if I kept her away from the chaos, she'd have a better chance." The state's attorney countered, painting a stark picture of Vanessa's shortcomings. "Miss Daniels, you've demonstrated a pattern of instability. How can you assure this court that you're capable of providing a safe, nurturing environment for your daughter now?" Vanessa hesitated, her confidence faltering. She looked at Amara again, tears brimming in her eyes. "Because she's my world," she said softly, "and I'll fight every day to prove I can be the mother she deserves." Then it was Harper's turn. Though still presiding over the case, he was now personally entangled in its outcome, a situation that blurred every line of professionalism he'd ever upheld. At his lawyer's urging, he took the stand, leaving behind the gavel. For the first time in his career, the room held its collective breath. As Harper recounted his side of the story, he spoke of his younger years, his ambition, and his ignorance of Vanessa's pregnancy. "If I had known," he said, his voice breaking for the first time, "I wouldn't have walked away. I wasn't ready for a family back then, but I would have tried. I would have been there." He paused, his gaze settling on Amara, who stared back at him with wide, curious eyes. "And now that I know," he continued, "I'll do whatever it takes to make up for the time I've lost." The cross-examination was brutal. The state's attorney wasted no time questioning his intentions. "Judge Harper, you've had no contact with this child for 6 years. Do you really believe stepping into her life now is in her best interest?" Harper took a deep breath. "I don't just believe it," he said firmly. "I know it. Amara deserves stability, love, and someone who will fight for her no matter what. If that means I have to prove myself every day, then I will." The room was silent except for the soft scribble of the court reporter's pen. The judge overseeing the case, an older man named Leonard Shaw, finally spoke. "This is an extraordinary situation," he said, his tone grave. "The law prioritizes the child's welfare above all else. With that in mind, I will hear from the person this affects most." All eyes turned to Amara. She hesitated at first, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly. The guardian encouraged her, kneeling to whisper something that made her nod. Slowly she approached the witness stand, her small frame dwarfed by the towering furniture. "Amara," Judge Shaw said gently, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "You're trying to figure out where I should live. And where do you want to live?" he asked, his tone soft but firm. Amara's eyes darted between Vanessa and Harper. She hesitated, then said, "I want to live with both of them." The courtroom rippled with surprise, murmurs breaking out despite the judge's call for order. Vanessa looked stunned, while Harper's usually composed face softened with something that looked like hope. "But I know that's not how it works," Amara added, her voice tinged with wisdom far beyond her years. "I just want to feel safe and loved." Her words hit harder than any testimony, any argument. They were simple, pure, and cut through the noise of the legal battle. But they left everyone with one question: how could they honor her request? In a world bound by rules and limits, the stakes had never felt higher, and the answers weren't clear. The courtroom reconvened the next day, the tension palpable, as Judge Leonard Shaw prepared to deliver his verdict. The events of the past weeks had transformed this custody case into something far more profound, a reflection on responsibility, redemption, and what it truly meant to be a family. All eyes were on him, but his gaze rested firmly on Amara. This case has presented challenges that extend beyond the legal realm. He began, his deep voice filling the room. At its core, it's about a little girl who deserves a stable, loving home. It's about balancing her need for security with the opportunity to know her father, who has only recently come into her life. Judge Shaw paused, letting his words sink in. After reviewing all the evidence, hearing all the testimony, and considering Amara's own wishes, this court has reached a decision. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Harper sat motionless, his hands folded tightly together. Amara, too young to fully grasp the gravity of the moment, clutched her stuffed bunny and stared up at the judge with wide, expectant eyes. "It is the court's ruling," Shaw continued, "that Amara Daniels will remain in the custody of her mother, Vanessa Daniels. However, the court also recognizes the importance of Amara developing a relationship with her biological father. Therefore, Judge William Harper is granted joint custody with structured visitation and shared responsibilities." The courtroom erupted into hushed murmurs as the verdict settled over them. Vanessa let out a soft, shaky exhale, her tears flowing freely. Harper's head dipped slightly, relief and determination etched into his face. Judge Shaw wasn't finished. "This decision is not an end, but a beginning. It is a chance for two parents to set aside their past, to work together in the best interest of the child who connects them. Amara deserves love and stability, and it is up to both of you to provide it." As the proceedings concluded, Harper approached Vanessa outside the courtroom. For a moment they stood in silence, two people with a complicated history, now bound by something far greater. Finally, Harper extended his hand for Amara. He said simply, as Amara walked out of the courtroom, hand in hand with both her parents, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by the hope of a new beginning. Because sometimes, even the most fractured families can find a way to heal. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales that remind us of the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. Your support keeps these stories alive.